So last week we talked about the Uranus-Pluto alignments and how they've been active since 2007, how they directly correlated with the social upheaval, drastic economic change, political radicalism, large-scale protests, disruptive technologies that we've been seeing emerging, and the countercultural activity with the emergence of social media, Bitcoin, the darknet, etc. We've also covered how Uranus liberates the repressed, or Uranus has been liberating the repressed Dionysian impulse, invoking drastic social change and upheaval through emancipating the more repressed and erotic dimensions of life and resulting in a loosening of social restraints and invoking eruptions of a volcanic nature. We've seen this through the destructive elemental energies in nature discharging and unleashing themselves through earthquakes, through storms. We've witnessed over the past 8 years massive social injustice and economic inequality, increasing human rights abuses, the acceleration and intensification and spreading of ISIS throughout the Middle East, the return of hate crimes, the militarization of the police, the emboldening of dictatorial forces by government, out of control, illegal immigration, the breakdown of irrational diplomacy, and the lack of enforcement of justice, where justice means just us. Terrorists driving trucks into large crowds, or people while assaulting strangers with knives and machetes in public open markets, agitated and volatile financial markets, the manipulation of the markets and obliteration of the natural price discovery mechanism by the elite, an unsettled political atmosphere on the body politic of most nations throughout Europe, Asia, and especially in the United States. Intensified storm activity, high winds, earthquakes, as I mentioned earlier, and massive eruptions of volcanoes occurring at all different levels of intensity throughout Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, Indonesia. We're seeing it now with Mount Etna in Sicily, the Colma in Mexico, Hawaii's Kilu, the Merapi in Indonesia. We're seeing a volcano in Svalech in Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. And we're also seeing it occur as well in Africa, in the Republic of Congo. So we're seeing a collective atmosphere of stormy, intense, morose moodiness, also reflected within the global collective, with extreme emotional ordeals, sense of societal demoralization, people going through complete breakdowns of all different types, whether they're prompted economically, emotionally, politically, socially. We're seeing repression and very much what we've seen with this Pluto-Uranus square, it's coincided, as I mentioned a couple of weeks back, with the dramatic rise in diagnosis of bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder with people who are battered by intense emotional storms, fierce intensity, a condition that can be both frightening and often requires some degree of medical intervention and treatment. So we're seeing this continue, and when it's been building up since 2008. So this is just a quick review of what we covered with a little bit more detail on the volcanoes, because intense volcanic activity is very much an excellent metaphor of the Uranus-Pluto energy and how it expresses itself. Now, what I want to talk about here is certainly about the collective psychology, because many astrologers talk about the personal psychology, someone who goes through Uranus-Pluto transit, what that could mean. Certainly, it could indicate a major change in their life that requires them that may invoke some existential crisis for them to reassess their values and beliefs. But on a bigger level, the Uranus-Pluto has very much to do with the type of mass psychology of a nation. Now, the first one to really address this in a very literal and systematic way was the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. And he states that the psychology of the individual is reflected in the psychology of the nation. And the same principle which operates in individuals are seen operating in nations, according to Jung. And that being the inner dynamics of man are paralleled by the outer dynamics of society, or what we call the mass or the masses. Now, Jung states that the collective force within a nation can encourage a man or woman to act out in a less conscious level or way until a certain point is reached where he or she is no longer acts by their own prerogative or obeying his or her own conscience, but becomes simply part of this impersonal mob mentality. And we've seen this really play out very well throughout in the Middle East, through many of the large-scale organized strikes and protests in Europe, in South America. We've seen it also play out with the Occupy Wall Street in 2011. But since 2007 on, we've seen this very much play out with the many examples of both locally and internationally of people sort of losing it. When people are put into a situation where they have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And this is very much akin to the type of principle, psychological principle, that Carl Jung was referencing back in the 40s. So when such mass force becomes highly activated in a situation, it can develop where the nation itself has a neurotic, or in many cases like a psychotic breakdown or mental illness. For Jung wrote that the masses are always breeding grounds of psychic epidemics. So periodically, certain nations, during certain periods, during certain planetary activations, are prone to going through some type of psychic epidemic or psychic breakdown. Now, we saw an example of that certainly in the 1930s with the rise with Nazi Germany. With the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party, we saw it happen also on the other side of the world with Japan, with the rise of fascist Japan. All right, we saw that to some degree with the psychedelic and countercultural revolution within the 60s, where the United States, Britain, and Western Europe and parts of France went through a very similar type of breakdown or neurotic epidemic through the countercultural revolution, the anti-government revolution, the civil rights revolution, the sexual emancipation revolution, the women's right revolution. So these are all examples of where the psychology of the nation goes through some type of shift and eventual neurotic culmination or epidemic or psychic epidemic. And we've seen this historically. We are now seeing that again. And we're reaching that critical point where individuals soon will no longer be able to act for him or herself, obeying their own conscience, especially the less differentiated ones. People who certainly buy into mainstream mime, vote Democrat and Republican, no matter who's listed on the ballot, people who go to Walmart, people who never question authority, people who simply believe in what's shown on television commercials, simply people who believe in CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, swallow fake news whole, believe that all is well, totally buy into the particular type of consumption-driven culture. And you see this you see this across all the different generations here. Now, Jung's point is that nations, like individuals, can be described psychologically. And further, nations can have its own collective psychological illness, as I stated, right? Nations go through periods of psychic disassociations and nervous breakdowns, and the nation or the mass of that nation can be viewed as a species of a greater individual. So the individuation of a person is very much part of the main thrust and drive in psychology. We can also see the individuation of a nation is very much the thrust and development of collective psychology that Jung was talking about. Now, what I want to talk about here is not just the Uranus-Pluto in itself. I want to talk about the Pluto-Sun dynamic, especially in regards to the U.S. horoscope. Now, if we take a look here, let me pull over here to the U.S. horoscope for a minute. We see here that looking at the United States horoscope, July 4th, 1776, regardless what time you use, there is an ongoing Pluto-Sun dynamic by transit, by planetary transit, impacting the chart of the United States. Again, this is the United States chart. What we want to do here is we're looking here, July 4th, 1776. I have a 2 p.m. time. All right, this is a time based on the records that came directly from the Continental Congress, where John Hancock stated that the final ratification based on his signature to the fair copy document occurred approximately at 2 p.m. That's in a letter that was found and was part of a biography written on him in the 1940s. So using that time, we can then assess what this body politic of the nation is undergoing and going through, and then make predictions. But we also could describe what's really going on like right now. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Sun-Pluto aspect. So what you see here is you see the Sun of the U.S., right? Here's the Sun in the natal chart of the U.S. And if I use the current transits, and we look at the transits, we could see Pluto has been opposing the Sun of the U.S. all the way from 2012 and will continue into 2018. All right, if I drag this out, you can see this a little better here. Right, so what we're seeing here is it's basically showing you a graphical presentation of this Pluto opposing the U.S. Sun. It's been in orb since 2012, will continue to peak in its impact, right? And it was doing so most intensely from 2015 to 2016, and will continue doing so as it's waning in influence all the way until the end of 2018. So let me explain a little bit of what Pluto-Sun aspects reveal, because in terms of the symptoms on a personal level, and then I'm going to explain it and what the symptoms are most obvious on a collective level. So many of the Sun-Pluto symptoms have been well cataloged in astrological text, and they include, in general, when they impact an individual, when an individual is going through their own transiting Pluto to their natal Sun, their own transiting Pluto to their natal Sun, a thirst for power and control, compulsive and obsessive behavior, an intense fear of vulnerability or being exposed, introversion, detective-like curiosity, a fascination with what lurks below, an exaggerated fear of death or loss, anxiety revealing itself in the upset stomach or the racing heart at night, an insatiable hunger for money and the power and security it provides, a tendency towards triangulation in all types of business partnerships and relationships, the inevitable betrayals, penetrating insight into one's own and others' motivations, a suspicion of the unknown and unfamiliar, a hearty and intense passionate sexual appetite that's often colored by jealousy and distrust, an exaggerated fear of loss, a powerful resourcefulness and survival capacity, great endurance, a refusal to let go, a tendency to accumulate resentments, many resentments, vengeful behavior, a strong connection with the animal's soul and the need to sweat, a quiet but powerfully pronounced competitiveness. So these are just a few of many of the symptoms associated with the Pluto-Sun complex. But I think what I just described to you do convey the flavor of the aspect, especially with the exaggerated fear of loss and the sense of needing to survive and thrive in a very harsh and volatile environment. the sense of insatiable need for power to provide security and control, or the belief that it provides the level of security one hungers for. The issue of triangulation, you're going to see this as a very common theme with people going through Pluto, or people who have very strongly tenated Pluto in their charts. So triangulation, where there's always three parties involved. It's never one or two, it's always a triangulation, and it alludes to betrayals and suspicious motivations. So you can see here how that theme has very much been playing out, especially look at the level of political subterfuge that's been playing out since the beginning of the 2016 election. Now, talking about the Pluto-Sun transits, from a mundane standpoint, they reveal themselves through deep political reform, through coercive grassroots movements, anti-elitist movements. It's the Pluto-Sun wants to purge the body politic of a nation's deeply enrooted political families, or the political elite. It definitely wants to purge the nation's body politic from the dysfunctional power structure. It creates developments that evoke deep-seated titanic shifts in society and leadership. Historically, it often brings complete and unconditional systemic economic collapse of unsustainable, untenable structures, followed by a major reconfiguration before some form of healing and economic recovery can recur. So that's very important to keep in mind, because we did talk about earlier a few weeks back about whatever was unsustainable and untenable during Uranus-Pluto periods often bring on some level of collapse that often follows some type of major reconfiguration and renaissance. So collectively, Pluto seeks, when Pluto is very active in the chart of a nation, it seeks to create underground economies such as black markets, Bitcoin, for example, and all the various stores using cryptocurrencies that are on the darknet. It seeks to create the underworld culture and organized criminal world. It's very much connected with a command economy model that seeks government and public institutions that fall within that umbrella. So it's very much connected with economies where the government has more control, where corporate and government interests begin to merge. It's very much connected with fascism, but not just the type of fascism we see in the 30s, but the type of merger of corporate and government and private interest occurring on Wall Street. Too big to jail, too big to fail institutions. It's the empowerment of the collective to constellate a potent transformational leader that will invoke change in the system, that will challenge and change the body politic of a nation. Whether he's often this leader is very powerful, has a tremendous prowess and capability, and is someone who often is, regardless of how it's viewed from the left or right, invokes a level of change, evokes a level of deep-seated change within the power structure of that nation. The Pluto-Sun aspects also create the rise of the deep state. We'll talk a little bit about the deep state more in a minute, but the deep state politics, where the deep state may have been something that you would find discussed on an Alex Jones episode, or something we see in a conspiratorial movie such as JFK. But now the deep state intervention becomes very clear and detectable, where its policies of influencing and manipulating anti-democratic coalitions in a covert manner within the political system for the purpose of ensuring specific interests of the power elite of society are met, regardless, within a seemingly democratic framework of the political landscape, meaning that the deep state continues to impose its policies by using coercion at all different levels to get elected individuals to basically rubber stamp and enforce those policies. So what we'll see with Pluto-Sun periods that we've been in since 2012 and will continue most intensely into 2018 is we'll see a deep state takeover of foreign policy, which we've already seen with the Obama administration, that seeks to coerce other nations against its long-term interests to impose its own policies in order to ensure its future hegemony and global economic dominance. So we've been seeing that really play out very well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Pluto represents the deep state, right? It very much is connected with the deep state of a nation. But what is the deep state? Many astrologers even today deny the fact of the deep state. Many, in fact, the deep state is just considered, mere conspiratorial speculation. It falls within the realms of the fringe. It's almost like talking about. It's almost on the same line of talking about alien abduction, right? But let me explain to you what I believe the deep state is. And the deep state, in the United States in particular, is a secret government superstate structure that steers defense and foreign policy behind the facade of democracy, which finances itself through international trafficking networks and a powerful shadow banking system. Now, Chris Hedges, an American journalist specializing in American politics and society, explains it best as to why it's taken so long for most people to come to terms that nearly all forms of governance since 1947 onwards is about maximizing corporate profit at the expense of its citizenry, when he states, quote, "The ability to grasp the pathology of our oligarchic rulers is one of our gravest faults. We have been blinded to the depravity of our ruling elite by the relentless propaganda of public relation firms that work on behalf of corporations and the rich," unquote. So the Pluto-Sun alignment here, with Pluto hitting the U.S. Sun, as I'm showing here, all right, to the U.S. horoscope, relates to the rise of the plutocratic elements in the body politic of a nation. It also rules the rise of specific agencies such as the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the Federal Reserve, etc. All right, it correlates to the attainment of power of all kinds of society, the attainment of power of all kinds in society through these various known and unknown agencies that operate underneath the guise of public government. It also relates to the collective atmosphere of the highly charged political drama and subterfuge that often leads to major power struggles that can lead to either political reform or social revolution. Geopolitically, this transit here is very much connected with major policy and trade agreements, the Pacific Partnership, for example, NAFTA, international initiatives, foreign policy confrontations, along with titanic geopolitical power struggles. So since 2012, right? If we take a look here, if we go back to 2012, we can see around that time, okay, we could see Pluto was approaching the Jupiter-Sun conjunction, and around that time, it began making direct hits. And if you go back to 2012, you can essentially see this play out very perfectly with the Obama administration, which was essentially negligent in the sense of rubber stamping the globalist doctrine and policies to supersede both domestic economic and foreign policy for the U.S. While at the same time the administration was doing this, the Federal Reserve, in coordination with the Obama administration and Wall Street, were implementing extend and pretend means to pump up the markets through manipulation of the interest rates and markets while announcing rosy job numbers through the manipulation of statistics, essentially putting out fake news and economic data. As things continued to improve on Wall Street, things went from bad to worse on Main Street. And as a result of the repression of the truth, the proliferation of fake news, the acceleration, intensification of extend and pretend economic policies to pump up the markets while the middle class continued to deleverage, right? As a result of all this repression that was basically being implemented and pushed through, that were the prerogatives of the deep state and its agents in the White House and within all the various different federal agencies, resulted in a political earthquake of the likes that the mainstream media and political pundits, including 90% of the astrologers, never saw coming on the 2016 election, where we all witnessed a major middle-class voter revolt, resulting in Trump's election by a demoralized and essentially deleveraged middle class that has lost all its hope because the democratically elected government was negligent to the social contract with the people and was superseded by the policies of the deep state, to whom most lawmakers and key government officials secretly serve. So Pluto has especially power over the global financial elite, not just the government elite, all right? Not just the people that reside in Washington, that reside within the NSA, the NSO, and the CIA, and all other military agencies, all right, known and unknown. But it also has a very deep connection with a powerful global financial elite, right? And now, for those of you who actually use a Sibley chart, this will make much more sense, all right, what I'm about to say to you. So I'm going to bring up the Sibley chart just for the moment. And there are many astrologers who continue to use the Sibley chart. Let me just bring that up here. All right, and this is the United States Sibley chart for 5:10 p.m. July 4th, 1776. And if we look here, we notice that transiting Pluto, all right, and if I use Porphyry house system, transiting Pluto is not only been hitting the sun, but it's on the cusp of the second house of the U.S. Sibley chart. The second house, for those of you who don't know, has to do with the nation's financial system, its currency, its savings, its assets, its general economy. It's the general constructs and fundamentals of its economy. So keep that in mind when I explain next about how Pluto especially has rulership over the powerful global financial elite. Many everyday citizens assume the powerful global financial elite operates behind closed doors in secret conclaves like a scene out of Spectra board meetings in its most recent James Bond film. All right, and although that is true, the power elite does much of its ongoing communications and activities hidden in plain sight through speeches, seminars, webcasts, and technical papers and policy statements that the mainstream media purposely ignores, marginalizes, plays down, and pretends does not exist. And these speeches, all these seminars and webcasts, many of them are readily available from many private and public institution websites and media channels. You can see these. And yes, I will state that there's a lot of meetings that are going on, right? A lot of private meetings that are going on in the sidelines, like Davos, like the annual Bilderberg meetings, like the IMF annual meetings, and the G20 summits. But the results or policy changes or proclamations of those secret meetings are typically announced or leaked, thanks to Alex Jones, by the way. Many of them that are leaked can be reasonably inferred based on the subsequent policy coordination that occurs shortly after those meetings, meaning we can get a good idea what decisions they made, how this will impact us, all right, and how it demonstrates what they do versus what the media says is two different things. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here, because I think you can get a little bit lost in this all. One example about what I'm talking about in regards to public statements that the financial global elite makes in its public communications is very much connected with a statement just made recently in Bloomberg News by Mohammed A. Al-Aran. He was born on August 19th, 1958. And there's a reason why I'm giving you his birthday. All right, we'll get to that in a moment. Al-Aran is a bona fide member of the global power elite, a former deputy director of the IMF and president of the Harvard Management Company. He writes for Bloomberg, and right now he is raising all serious doubts about the sustainability of the bull market. The bull market is operating within stocks because of the reduced liquidity resulting from simultaneous policy of tightening by the Fed, the European Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan. He's basically stating that all stocks starting in 2009, when Barack Obama announced the end of the recession, basically rose on a sea of liquidity. Liquidity, for those of you who don't know, is basically money they print up out of thin air. They don't even print the money. It's digitally generated money, all right, that has no backing by gold, no backing by any means of production. They generate that money. They inject that money, not to you, but into too big to jail, too big to fail Wall Street banks and financial institutions. With that money, those institutions buy up stock. They buy stock and they buy other assets. Meanwhile, while that's occurring through that QE policy, this liquidity called QE1, then they did it again with QE2, QE3, and Operation Twist, the Federal Reserve was buying back all the bad instruments, meaning all those mortgage-backed securities and all those other instruments that created the near financial collapse of the system in 2007, 2008. They were buying them back off of the financial institutions and banks, and in return injecting new money, good money, or let's just say fiat money, into the system in order to prop up the stock market. So basically, Al-Aran says that the stocks rose based on all this pump, right? All this liquidity, all this financial pump into the system. And now that they're withdrawing, they're reducing the liquidity. They're not going to continue to pump the system up anymore. And they're talking about raising interest rates and selling back all these bad assets that they have on their bank sheets. They're going to sell them back and encapsulate them as bonds, and then force these institutions or coerce these institutions to buy those bonds, to buy those bad assets. So this is what he's stating, is that the liquidity is being removed, and this is a warning not only to the public, but it's a warning to other elites. And not only to the other elites, but to the mega rich individuals and large banks and institutional investors who have a dense network of contracts and inside informants. So basically, he's stating that the elite is about to pull the plug on the markets. The markets are artificially propped up because of this massive injection of liquidity. Not only once, twice, three times, but four times they inject it, keeping interest rates near 0%, keeping them suppressed artificially, while they were buying off and taking on all these toxic instruments. Now they're going to encapsulate these toxic instruments into these new bonds, all right, and these other vehicles, these other instruments that they're going to sell back to these actual institutions while they reduce the amount of money they're injecting into the market. So, all right, now why is that important? Because what's interesting about Al-Aran's natal horoscope has to do with the fact that he was born in 1958. I'm going to show you this. On August 21st. Excuse me, not August 21st, August 19th. All right. And if you notice here, take a look. His sun is at 26 degrees Leo. His Pluto is at 1 degrees of Virgo. the upcoming eclipse on August 21st is going to hit his Sun-Pluto conjunction. So let me show you what that is. So you could see this upcoming eclipse, this Mars, North Node, Sun, Moon, in Leo eclipse is all hitting his Sun-Pluto conjunction. He is the elite. He's connected with the elite. He's sending a powerful message to the elite. And as most astrologers know, any eclipse directly to one sun and their Sun-Pluto conjunction is indicative of a major, major drastic change in finances or political position or status. So it's very interesting that he makes this statement to all the mega rich, the large investors, the institutional investors, that the liquidity is being drawn out of the system. They're going to tighten, and this may result in a crash when that liquidity is completely removed. All right, so it's very important to keep this in mind, right? Very important to keep this in mind as we move forward, that we have someone within the elite that's actually signaling the sirens here. So that's basically what I have to say for the moment. I'll take some questions, and we can finish off that way. Hopefully that gave you some idea of what's in store for us. And for those of you who just think this eclipse is just about the end of Trump, the beginning of Pence, and the rise of the new left in the Democratic Party, I can assure you, you really do need to attend my upcoming eclipse webinar, because I have something else to tell you about that. And hopefully I showed you this example here because I wanted you to clearly see what's in store for us, that when you have someone in the elite making these statements, all right, it's a sign that they know that the powers that be in the central banks are going to pull the plug on the system. This is all connected with the oligarchy, with the deep state. It's all about achieving a one world currency system, and they need to accelerate their plans because Bitcoin and the rest of the cryptocurrencies continue to accelerate and go up in price and in value, and they're being utilized more and more on the internet, not within the dark net, but also with regular storefronts and retail institutions. So Bitcoin is a revolution. It's a countercultural revolutionary instrument that's being used by the collective over to move their assets out of government control institutions that are under the control of the oligarchy. And this is what we're seeing now. So I'll take any questions, and we can look further at some of these charts here. Okay. Yeah, I don't see any questions, so I don't see anything. Okay. Yeah, so so one of the things in the upcoming solar eclipse webinar I'm going to do is talk about which groups of people, depending on what year they were born, what months and year they were born, who will be directly impacted by the eclipse. Not just everyone who's born on August 21st, but like in this instance, all individuals who are born within a degree or two, who have their natal Plutos within a few degrees of the eclipse, are extremely vulnerable to going through some type of personal upheaval or volcanic earthquake in their personal lives. I'm no comment on healthcare right now. The healthcare is going to break down and implode. The Obama system, healthcare exchanges are imploding right now. It's going to force the issue. I see a complete revision with the legislation coming up, but I don't really see that coming to a head. I don't see that coming to a head until they work out some of the with the bigger problem, and that has to do with the budget. The fact that there's a very explosive situation evolving now within the budget. How much is on the Fed's balance sheet right now? It's approaching 5 trillion. It's 4.6 or 7 trillion at this point. It's approaching 5 trillion. It's unsustainable, untenable. The fiat currency system is at risk. The integrity of the system is at risk. The bond market is at risk. They cannot keep interest rates any lower without imploding the pension system. But the pension system is already imploding in Illinois. It's imploding in New Jersey. Illinois is now on the verge of junk bond status. The credit rating is at junk status right now. That is going to continue to spread like an epidemic throughout the rest of the states. There's only one state that has a completely financially solvent pension system. So one of the things is I would suggest for those of you who really are concerned about their chart getting hit by the eclipse, you can check in with me on that. There's many other astrologers talking about this. So again, I would suggest at this point that it's something that you definitely want to review. If you have an astrologer you go to, you definitely want to talk to them about it, especially for those of you born in the 50s who have Pluto in Leo and late Leo. That is it's imperative. For those of you who are born in the late 40s who have Saturn in Leo, you definitely want to address that as well. But especially for those of you who've got the eclipse hitting your natal Pluto. Mason's asking a question. He's concerned about the disclosure. Will the eclipse be a trigger for that? I believe there'll be a number of disclosures. The big question is, will it be the disclosure event that we're all been looking out for? And I believe that the possibility for that is definitely on the table now. There's a number of things that could force disclosure, but I'm not so sure. I'm not willing to answer that at the moment, but I believe disclosure is certainly on the table with the fact that this eclipse is occurring especially over the 9th house of Washington, D.C. Eclipse horoscope. So I can put that eclipse horoscope up here for all to see, just to get an idea what Mason is referring to. So we could see this eclipse all occurring in the 9th house. The 9th house has to do with outer space. It would certainly have to do with any foreign civilization. It would have to do with any type of ET presence occurring in the world. Yeah, so there's some astrologers that use precession-corrected transits, hits to natal charts, and it will affect so I'll be on the lookout for that. We'll see. Right now, the Pluto-Sun definitely is constantly very powerfully with the rise of Trump and his continuation of his policies that will, I believe many of the things that we're going to see unfold with Trump will occur sometime around the eclipse and thereafter. All right. And for those of you who continue to believe in Trump's impending inevitable political demise, implosion, and his impeachment, again, I implore that I challenge you to go attend my seminar to show something else is coming along the way. And it has nothing to do with Trump is not going to disappear. Now, you can decide not to believe me, but remember, folks, for those of you who continue to take the side of the astrologers that he is going to disappear, I was the one that called not only the election, I called within 92% of accuracy with the states. I predicted states using the technology that I've demonstrated to you with the black box system and with the political contest horary, what states he would win. That result far surpassed anything by any forecaster out there. So when I tell you that Trump is he's not here to fade away, all right, so you can have Mike Pence be our next president. I'm making that very clear that the astrology is making it clear that we have a major crisis and Trump is going to be dead center bullseye of that crisis. And he represents the Pluto-Sun crisis that I just discussed a bit earlier, all right? That is an existential crisis the fact that whatever crisis we will go through, and it usually infers triangulation. So a convergence of three crises. I'm going to discuss what those three crises will most likely be in that Eclipse seminar. And again, if you happen to think that he's just going to fade away, as I keep getting told every day and every way, by the powers that be of the NCGR and AFA and all these other, I'm telling you right now, that is not how it's going to go down. All right? That's not, and guess what? You and I are all going to be players in the narrative. This is not something we're just going to sit back and watch unfold on CNN while we can go on with our simple lives of consumption. It's just not how it's all going to turn out. And that's why I'm doing these Facebook Lives, to get the message across. All right? So that's what I have to say about that. When is the Eclipse Seminar? The Eclipse Seminar will be just a few days just prior to the eclipse, on the 20th, on August 20th. All right, it's on the weekend, and I'm definitely going to make some very powerful predictions. I don't expect everyone to come to pass, but I will make predictions, and I will assure you many of those predictions will come to pass. All right, because I've been working a lot on this. I've been looking at every factor, things that I can't show here to go beyond the scope of what we're discussing, but I am very aware of how this Pluto is constellating, all right? And I'm not marginalizing it and playing it down, because I'm very much aware of how it impacts people's lives when I consult with them and what type of strategies I have to help them with. And I can tell you right now, what's happening with this country is very much has to do with the Pluto complex in play. It's very much connected with the deep state. It's very much connected with the fact that we have a tax base that supports two civilizations, all right? Not just one. And it goes much, much deeper than that. Warren Charles Wyndham asked, my sun is at 20 degrees Capricorn, so the next half a dozen solar eclipses have Pluto-Sun conjunct opposition. So I think that, I think people who are going to get directly hit by the eclipse are the ones that really have to take proactive measures and prepare for it, depending on what other factors are going on in their chart. Renee asked, do you see the U.S. fracturing into separate republics as a result of this upheaval? The answer is no. I see the U.S. going through a reconfiguration, a reform. There is a possibility, of course, with social revolution and a complete breakup of the states. But I do believe that was more likely the case if Hillary Clinton got elected, that we would see a breakup or we would see social revolution occur. I think Trump will do what's necessary in order to prevent that breakup, even if it means that he has to default on the debt or taking extreme measures. Generally with Trump, he does things in a very extreme and dramatic fashion, which is perfectly symbolically aligned with Pluto and this eclipse that is coming up. So I don't see the U.S. breaking down and devolving. I don't see the type of devolution occurring in Great Britain that is occurring in the United States. I see less of that occurring. I see a devolution occurring with the European Union, with the UK. I see some of that occurring in Eastern Europe and in Spain. But with the United States, I'm seeing more of state empowerment. There's going to be a power struggle between states and the federal government as things continue to unwind and really get cooking between now and 2022. Karen mentioned that psychic breakdown is a perfect grounds for those in power to exert their agenda through the media. Yes, exactly. So that's where the power struggle begins. So as I mentioned earlier, we saw like a collectivist. We're seeing the emergence of this collectivist group that continues to want to exert power as a breakdown in the social structure and the nation's social institutions are underway. So I believe there will be a revolt. We saw the first phase of that revolt with this election, and we're going to see that those revolts and disruptions through technology and with the markets in the coming months ahead. I think that's pretty much it. Between now and 2022. So yeah, so why I'm going to explain that. That has very much to do with the Barbell Cyclic Index. Barbell Cyclic Index is one of the most reliable political and economic indicators of stability, growth, boom, and bust periods. And I will talk about that more in the coming weeks. I'll certainly talk about that in the upcoming webinar. But that has very much to do that timing of when the Barbell Cyclic Index made a significant drop. It hits a bottom in 2022. So that indicates a continuing period of instability, political breakdown, social breakdown, a rise of countercultural libertine forces, and the continuation of the people empowerment movement on a collective scale. All right, so I think that's it. There's no questions here. I'm going to hide this. I want to thank you all for attending. This is the first time using the Be Live console. Again, as I stated, it's not so easy to manipulate, especially when I'm trying to refer to my material and look at the charts. But I want to thank you for being patient with that. I'll certainly answer more things as we go. The main thrust I want to get across is there's been a marginalization by the media of the type of crisis, or converging crises that are going on. And we have this Pluto-Sun dynamic that is going to be intensified and accelerated by this eclipse, which makes a direct hit to Donald Trump's chart, and it makes hits to a number of other charts throughout the globe, charts of other nations, charts of financial institutions, charts of markets, which I'll talk about in my webinar, but I'll talk enough about to give you here a perspective that what we're going through, this type of bipolar collective crisis, is impacting all of us, regardless of what our transits. We're all feeling that intense, thick atmosphere. The ambient of the collective is going through some type of death transformation process, and it's going to continue to play out for quite a while here. So I want to thank you for your time, and I hope to see you next week, assuming that we work out all the technical issues and Comcast is cooperative. And I'll look for your questions between now and then. Thank you very much, and I'm signing out. Good night.